Mhm. 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 Mhm.
Hi, Barry.
Sifting, sorting
Why?
were done by hand, and workers hauled the sacks of heavy grain from one floor to another. Then in the 1790s, a pioneering engineer named Oliver Evans invented an automated system that radically sped up and simplified flour making. Evans' new streamlined process spread quickly, transforming the business of milling. In fact, Old Rye Mill installed it probably before 1810 and still uses this important building block of the Industrial Revolution. One of only a few mills where it survives mostly in its original form. Also displayed on our grinding floor is a roller mill installed in the early 1900s to compete with inexpensive flour from Western mills. This mill uses steel rollers rather than grindstones, which crush the grain, producing refined white flour, which consumers at the time incorrectly believed to be healthy. Through the years, small local mills like Old Rye Mill fought for survival by adapting, but many failed, and in 1952, Rye Mill was sold to the state of Maryland. Soon, it became a historic site where generations have learned about how milling changed and developed from the colonial period into the 20th century. We welcome you to explore the mill, enjoy the sights and sounds of history, and take home highly nutritious, sustainably produced ingredients for all your baked goods.
I think Les just did a fantastic job with that. Okay. Past few times I have been so involved with getting up and running that I've forgotten to start the recording until the last minute. So at this point, I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of the Board of Friends of Wye Mill, the governing body that has been caring for, preserving, and interpreting Old Wye Mill in Wye Mills, Maryland since 1996. My name is Barry Kessler, and I've been the project director for an interpretation project funded by the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority through the stories of the Chesapeake Heritage Area. It's been a very exciting time, and I feel as if we've reached out and brought many new people into the circle of Old Wye Mill. And one of those people is Steve Childers, who responded very early on to our call and has stepped up and become really involved with our organization and created a wonderful link with, of course, Spoom and with Abbott's Mill. So we're hoping that that will be an ongoing collaboration. Steve has been an expert that I have gone to check facts and information, gain a greater understanding and context of Oliver Evans, a person I will readily admit I had never heard of before getting involved with Old Wye Mill, even though I spent 2 years in graduate study in Northern Delaware, a stone's throw of the places that Oliver Evans really created his spectacular advances in American industry. And for those of you who know about the University of Delaware programs, that's just an indication of how far apart Winterthur and Hagley can be, even though we're all sister programs. So not a whole lot of, we're all very friendly, but there isn't a whole lot of intellectual sharing, I'm afraid. Anyway, at this point, it is my great pleasure to turn over the program to Steve Childers. He has been involved with Abbott's Mill in our neighboring state of Delaware for 22 years, has been a board member of the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills. He writes a blog on the history of Abbott's Mill and milling in Southern Delaware. I encourage you to look at it and go visit it. Thank you very much, Steve. And I turn over the program to you to share your presentation.
All right, give me just 1 second here.
All right.
There, can you see that?
Beautiful.
All right, I apologize. I participated in a Zoom program this afternoon and everything was fine. And then when I tuned into Barry's program this evening, my video won't work. And who knows why. But at least you can see my shared screen. My participation in SPOOM Mid-Atlantic gives me an opportunity to visit a lot of mills in our region, which covers Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware. And we often hear that such and such a mill is includes the Oliver Evans system, including Y Mill. So who was Oliver Evans and what's this system we keep hearing about? Before I answer that, I'd like to give credit to my source. All right, come on now, let's get working. There we go. I borrowed heavily from a book by Eugene Ferguson titled Oliver Evans, Inventive Genius of the American Industrial Revolution. I checked last year on Amazon just to see if they had that book available and how much it costs. It's a paperback, and last year it was worth, well, I shouldn't say it's worth that, but it would have cost you $877.95 for a paperback. But this week it's only $75. But it is available on Amazon. Up until the late 18th century, the operation of grist mills was a very labor-intensive process that left many opportunities for contamination of the product, be it cornmeal or flour. And even way back then, people didn't like having specks of they didn't know what in their flour. This is a picture of a somewhat typical mill of the colonial period. The grain would have been carried in here on the ground floor, and it would have been carried upstairs by hand and dumped into this bolter, which would would have cleaned the grain. And then it would have fallen down a chute to the millstones. Can everybody see my cursor? Yes, okay. I can't hear anybody.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So it would have fallen down here to the millstones. It would have been ground into flour. The flour would have been collected in barrels and carried back upstairs with a hoist and spread out on the floor to cool and dry. It then would have been swept into a hole in the floor and would have fallen down into this bolter, which is basically a horizontal barrel covered in fabric. As it rotates, the flour falls through the fabric, and the larger bits called the throughs fall at the end into this barrel. And all that's done by hand. But it's important that we understand the mindset of the period. Up until the early 1800s, there was not much innovation in industry. Things were basically done the way they had always been done. Sons were told by their fathers, that's the way my father taught me to do it, and that's the way you're going to do it. One of the reasons there was not much innovation is because people tended to accept things the way they were, and it was difficult for them to think outside the box, so to speak. And it's important that you remember that as I continue. Oliver Evans was born in 1755 in Newport, Delaware, not far from where the Wilmington and Western Railroad is. Here's the station for the Wilmington and Western Railroad, and Greenbank Mill is just across the river right here. And this was the Evans family farm right here. And the mill would have been right there where that little blue circle is. Little is known about his childhood, but he must have had a very good education because he was an avid reader and he had the ability to put his thoughts on paper for others to understand. That was important. In 1783, when he was just 27 years old, he and his younger brother Joseph moved to Tuckahoe, Maryland. And as near as I can understand, it is probably where Queen Anne and Hillsborough are, right here. And they opened up a store. And this is very likely where he got his ideas about automating a flour mill. I suspect that he visited a mill nearby to perhaps purchase flour for his store. And he may have been surprised at the amount of labor that was required in the milling process. It may have been what was then called Seth's Mill, S-E-T-H, just a few miles down the Tuckahoe River. It was later called Layton's Mill, and later yet, more recently, Elbin's Mill. Or it may have been Y Mill, which is 7 miles to the west. We don't really know, we're just speculating. Evans was called back to Newport in July, and he and his older brothers, John and Theophilus, purchased part of the family farm from their father with the intention of building a mill on Red Clay Creek. Oliver supervised the outfitting of the mill, and at about the same time, he married Sarah Tomlinson. Because of a lack of money, he did not incorporate his ideas right away, but rather he carefully made drawings and models until he was absolutely satisfied that they would work. As Hezekiah Niles, editor of the Weekly Register, would later recall, Evans gained a reputation as a man who would never be worth anything because he was always spending his time on some contrivance or other. Yet nothing others could say would dissuade him from his idea of automating the milling process. Now, before I continue, I need to explain what a bolter is to those that don't know, because I'll make reference to it a couple of times. A bolter is a barrel-shaped device set horizontally, and it has cloth on the outside. And as it rotates, the flour falls through the cloth to kind of filter it. And the throughs, the larger bits, fall out the end of it. Okay, Evans' ideas made no changes to the way that grain was cleaned, ground, cooled, bolted, and packed. The changes were all in the way that the material was moved about the mill from one machine to the next. He didn't want to change the milling process. He just wanted to make it easier. The 5 main improvements that he eventually came up with were the bucket elevator that raised the grain or meal from one level to the next, an Archimedes style horizontal screw conveyor. Archimedes invented that thousands of years ago, but Oliver just made it so that it could be used to move flour. He also adapted what he called the drill, which was a horizontal box. It had a chain that went around, and hooked to the chain were little rakes that raked the flour across the bottom of the box and down a chute like this. And by the way, this picture was taken up in the attic of Abbott's Mill. He also invented the descender, which was a sloped chute with a belt on it, and the weight of the flour on the belt actually caused the belt to rotate and carry the flour down. I really don't think that was ever used very much, but that's on his list. And the other thing was the hopper boy. Now, this was something that he absolutely did invent. However, it didn't come easily. As he would later recall, a machine that would both spread and gather at the same time then seemed absurd and caused the months of the most intense thinking, for the absurdity always presented itself to baffle and deter me. But he persevered because the problem would not leave him, and he finally arrived at a solution. Although it now appears simple, it does the job required of it perfectly. And you can see an excellent example of it if you ever visit George Washington's mill in Mount Vernon. You'll need to go up to the top floor, but hopper boys are always on the top floor. Despite his great ideas, the mill that Oliver and his brothers were building opened in 1785 as a conventional mill, while he tried to find the money to hire carpenters to build his elevators and the hopper boy. He approached several large millers for financial help without luck. One of them was James Latimer, a local flour merchant and justice of the Newcastle County Court of Common Pleas. After hearing Evans' description of his elevator and hopper boy, he was unconvinced and explained, "Oh, Oliver, you cannot make water run uphill and you cannot make wooden millers." However, Latimer's son George urged Oliver to petition the Delaware legislature for the exclusive right to make his milling improvements, and in 1787, a state patent was granted for a period of 15 years. Before the federal patent law was passed, it was necessary for someone to get a patent in each state that he intended to use it in. And Evans also received one in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. There were quite a number of large mills at the time along the Brandywine that belonged to Quaker millers. After Evans' mill on Red Clay Creek was finally equipped with elevators and a hopper boy, 2 Quaker millers were invited to come see the improvements. They found the mill running all by itself while Oliver was out working in a nearby field. They inspected the mill at their leisure, and he was disappointed to later learn that the Quakers thought his mill a set of rattle traps, unworthy the notice of any man of sense. In my opinion, it was probably a mistake for him to leave the mill all by itself. He should have stayed there and explained how it worked. In 1789, Oliver Evans traveled to Maryland to visit the large Ellicott mills on the Patapsco River, excuse me. The Ellicotts were very much more progressive Quakers, and they readily adopted his elevators and the Hopper Boy. In exchange, they gave him the exclusive rights to use a device of their own designs, the screw conveyor. He improved it by removing the helical screw and replacing it with a series of little wooden paddles. That prevented the meal from caking. The principle remained the same, and from then on, Evans called it the conveyor. We tend to call it a horizontal screw conveyor, but still. In the fall of 1790, Evans moved his family to Wilmington and invited the public to come see a model of his automatic flour mill. A Brandywine miller thought enough of it to have Evans install the machinery in his mill, and other Quaker millers came to see the operation. This is a Hopper Boy. As Evans later explained, when the whole was going and all the millers were assembled about the Hopper Boy, they remained in silent astonishment until one of them exclaimed, "It will not do, it cannot do. It is impossible, it should do." It doing perfectly well at the same time. Within a short time, most of the other Brandywine mills were equipped, and 5 of the mill owners signed a testimonial that the improvements were a great savings of waste, labor, and expense, and not subject to get out of order. We therefore recommend them as well worthy the attention of those concerned with the manufacture of grain into flour. This helped him out tremendously. As soon as the Federal Patent Office opened in 1790, Evans filed an application, and his was the 3rd patent ever issued in the United States, signed by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. By 1792, over 100 mills were using Evans' ideas, including George Washington, who paid a license fee of $40 for his pair of millstones at Mount Vernon. Oliver was busy and had to send his brother Evan to supervise the installation. Can you imagine telling the President of the United States, "I'm sorry, I'm busy, I can't make it"? Evans again moved his family, this time to Philadelphia. And after several years of research, writing, and the search for financial backing, Oliver Evans' The Young Millwright and Miller's Guide was published in 1795. In the 3 years previous, Oliver was so engrossed in his research and writing that he neglected to earn a living, and his wife found it necessary to sell the linen cloth that she had made herself in order to buy bread for the table. Oliver first intended the book to be merely an instruction pamphlet for millers and millwrights. But when he consulted earlier writings, he found that the data was often unreliable. And he insisted on explaining the principles that everything was based on. John Nicholson, Comptroller General of Pennsylvania, loaned Evans $1,000 interest-free. That's over 200 years ago, to get his book published. Within 2 years, Nicholson himself was in serious financial trouble, but Evans was able to repay him in full within 10 years. The 440-page book with 26 engraved illustrations was issued in 15 different editions between 1795 and 1860. And reproductions are available now from Amazon for as little as $16.52 on paperback. The description on Amazon begins with, "This work has been selected by scholars as being culturally important and is a part of the knowledge base of civilization as we know it." Evans went on to patent a process of making millstones, and he built a profitable business in bolting cloth, elevator buckets, millstone hoisting screws, and other grist mill components. So if you have an old mill, it's possible that you've got some of his equipment in it, even if he didn't come there and install it himself. He sold these at his Philadelphia store, and he built a blacksmith shop attached to the store where his brother Evan and the blacksmith developed and patented a lever-operated device for packing flour into barrels. Although automated mills were popping up all over, many millers used his ideas without buying a license. Although they had not thought of the process themselves, once they saw it in operation, it seemed so self-evident that many of them thought that paying for an idea was unnecessary. For many years, Evans had numerous lawyers helping him protect his patent rights. In 1812, the Evans family moved again, this time to a home that they bought on what was then Sassafras Street in Philadelphia. It's now called Arch Street. And they were in a position to manage the store and live the rest of their lives comfortably. But Oliver had new ideas popping up in his head all the time. For several years, he had been tinkering with steam power in his spare time. It was not an entirely new idea, as low-pressure steam engines had been around for a couple of decades, but Evans thought the future was in high-pressure steam. A high-pressure steam engine is much smaller than a low-pressure engine of the same power, and is thus much more portable. Since 1803, one of his engines had been at work in his store on 9th and Market Streets. Of course, he had it working a way where visitors could easily see it, running a screw mill that he had designed and patented for grinding plaster of Paris. And to show its versatility, he also used it to saw slabs of marble. In Evans' own word, the driving of 12 saws in heavy frames, sawing at the rate of 100 feet of marble in 12 hours, made a great show and excited much attention. Evans knew that the engine could be used for nearly any task, but visitors had a hard time making the same assumption. Watching the steam mill sawing marble, visitors wanted to know, could it be used to saw wood? Could it grind grain? Could it power a boat? Of course, he said yes, but there was still doubt. Evans eventually received a commission from the Philadelphia Board of Health to build a steam-powered dredge to clean the docks and remove sandbars. And by the way, this picture was done by somebody that had never actually seen the dredge, so we can only guess at what it really looked like. However, when it was finished, he added powered wheels to this 37-foot scow, and he drove it down the streets of Philadelphia for a mile to the Schuylkill River. On the way, he circled around the Waterworks building on Market and Broad Streets, kind of showing it off a bit. For context, this would have been at about the same time that Lewis and Clark set out on their 2.5-year journey paddling wooden boats up the Missouri River from St. Louis to the Pacific Ocean and back. Between 1806 and 1812, Evans built the Mars Works, a large group of engineering shops to build his engines and boilers. Within a short time, it became the leading shop in Philadelphia for building steam engines and other heavy machinery. By 1811, it was also building iron gears of all sizes, and during the War of 1812, he produced cast iron cannons. Evans shipped a steam engine across the Allegheny Mountains to a mill in Pittsburgh, managed by his son George. After he had shipped his third engine to the Ohio River Valley, he finally decided to build a Western version of his Mars Works, the Pittsburgh Steam Engine Company, which was also managed by George Evans. As the Mars Works business grew, Oliver Evans turned his management over to his two sons-in-law and devoted all of his time to defending his flour mill patent, which had by now expired. A private bill entitled An Act for the Relief of Oliver Evans was passed by the U.S. Congress and signed by President Jefferson in January of 1808, which extended his patent another 14 years. And this caused the president to pay Evans' license fee of $80 for his 2 sets of millstones, plus interest of $9.60. This is the Pittsburgh mill. When Evans died in 1819, the Pittsburgh Gazette declared that his name would be remembered by a nation's gratitude when the comparatively insignificant herd of metaphysicians and conquerors shall have passed into total oblivion. Pretty good eulogy, I think. In the 70 years between the granting of his patent and the American Civil War, the American flour exports rose from about 1 million barrels to over 20 million barrels of flour. A couple little bits of trivia here. In World War II, a United States Liberty ship was named after him, the SS Oliver Evans. And in 2001, Oliver Evans was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. All right, just so that you can a little bit better understand how some of his material works, and I'm sure you Spumont people don't have any trouble understanding it, but for the rest of you, this is an old picture I found of Wye Mill, and by the way, I found it on the Delaware Public Archives. Here's a quick tour of Wye Mill. This is a drawing I did of the flow of material through Wye Mill as it's used today. Grain or corn is dumped into a hatch in the floor right in front of the millstones and falls into a funnel-shaped bin in the basement, which directs it down to the bottom of the second elevator, which is colored green in this picture. The elevator carries it all the way up to the attic level. and it falls down a chute into the grain garner, or it's just a small storage bin is what it is. From the garner, it can be let down this chute and fall down to the millstone. After it's ground into flour, the flour falls out the bottom of the millstone, down another chute, and into the first elevator, E1. E1 carries it upstairs and dumps it down here into the bolter. It's a screen bolter. It's got a rotating screen in there. The flour falls through the screen and the overs fall out the end of the screen. The flour falls down a pipe which goes into the flour hopper to be sold, and the overs go down a chute and are collected in a bag and used for chicken feed. To finish, I'd like to quote author Ferguson, who wrote the book I've referenced for this presentation, Oliver Evans' Inventive Genius of the American Revolution. He finished his book by stating, in addition to the legacies of mechanized production processes and high-pressure steam engines, Evans established the principle that federal patents could be protected in courts. Many a dreamer and visionary can safely be dismissed as a person who would never be worth anything. Other visionaries, like Oliver Evans, must be taken seriously. All right, I'll be glad to answer any questions. And I'm sorry, I can't show you my picture. And if you'll speak up a little bit, it just started raining really hard right here.
Oh, boy. So if there are any questions, maybe raise your hand. And I would say,
let me stop the share here. There we go.
There you go. Right. That way we can see if anybody has.
I can't promise I can answer them, but I'll do my best. No question. Well, I must have filled you with good information.
Steve, I learned something new every time I hear you talk about Oliver Evans. I think I had no idea that that how close Tuckahoe was and what the surrounding mills were, or exactly where the Red Clay Creek mill was in Delaware. So I really appreciate hearing about those details. And I think all of us who are interpreting at Old Wine Mill are going to be able to put this information into direct service when we open on April 30th. So with that, I would like to invite John Nizer again to come back and give everybody a little preview of what the season is going to be like, the activities of Old Wine Mill will be. Before I sign off, though, I want to mention one more time, because you can never acknowledge the funding sources enough, that we're very grateful to the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority for providing the funding that went into the speaker series last year and this year. So, John.
First of all, I'd like to thank Steve and everybody for tuning in tonight. Steve, excellent talk. I'd like to thank you and invite you to come to the mill again. I know you've been there many times. And also like to thank Sherry Johns, who gave our first speaker series on the Lloyd and Hemsley family, and to John Draper, who told us about agriculture from the 1600s to the 1950s. OY Mill 2022 grinding season starts on April the 30th. As Barry pointed out, we grind grain on the first and third Saturdays of each month from May through the end of October. This year, we're starting on April the 30th. So it gives us an extra grinding day. The mill is open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 3, and on Sundays, 1 to 3. If you go to our website, you will not only be able to see the 2022 season, but also go back to the 2021 season on our speaker series. Our website is oymill.org. This weekend, Saturday, August the 9th, from 9:30 to 1, we will be having volunteer training, not only doing new volunteers, but also training our old volunteers. New volunteers are welcome to come. Again, it's this Saturday from 9:30 to 1 p.m. And this year, our opening day is going to be low key compared to last year, because on on June the 18th, Saturday, June the 18th, we will have our wheat harvest festival, and that will be a big festival. And if you go on our website, you'll be able to find more information about that. I thank everybody once again for joining in, and we hope to see you at the mill. And if you do come to the mill, tell us you saw us on the video. Thank you very much, Barry, for hosting this, and for everybody that showed up. You have a great weekend and be safe.
If I could have just another minute, let me share my screen again for a second. All right, you mentioned my blog. If anybody's interested in following my blog on the history of the mills in Delaware, that's the address. I try to post something every other week, and I have a friend that posts on the odd week about the flora and fauna in the area. But every other week, I try to post something new about old mills. All right, I'm done talking.
Wonderful. Steve, thanks again. It's always great to hear your insight and research about this, I think, fascinating topic. So everybody, thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you down at Old Wye Mill. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.